The torchlight catches her face for only a moment, but Senifer sees everything he needs to see. She is perhaps 24 years old. Her skin is darker than Egyptian women, marked with the distinctive scarification patterns of Nubian nobility. Her wrists are bound with papyrus rope that has already rubbed the skin raw. Her clothing, what remains of it, suggests she was wealthy before yesterday, before the battle, before the soldiers came. She is one of 43 women being led through the underground passage beneath the Temple of Amun at Karnak. Senifer counts them as they pass because counting is his job. He is 23 years old, a temple scribe assigned to document the sacred purification rituals that follow military victories. He has held this position for 11 months. In that time, he has documented the processing of over 300 women. He has learned not to look at their faces. The passage descends at a steep angle, carved into bedrock that predates the temple above by at least 8 centuries. The walls are covered with hieroglyphics that most Egyptians never see, texts that describe rituals not mentioned in the public temple records, procedures that the high priests guard as carefully as they guard the gold in the treasury vaults. Senifer can read these texts. He wishes he could not. The air grows thicker as they descend. The smell of incense mixes with something older, something that Senifer's mind refuses to identify directly. It is the smell of the purification chambers. It is the smell of what happens to women who belong to defeated enemies. It is a smell that has saturated these stones for generations that no amount of natron or myrrh can fully mask. The woman with the Nubian scarification stumbles on the uneven steps. A temple guard catches her roughly, pushes her forward. She does not cry out. None of them cry out anymore. They learned, during the 3-day journey from the battlefield, that crying out makes things worse. Senifer's stylus moves across the papyrus automatically, recording details he will later wish he could forget. 43 women, 14 identified as wives of officers, 29 identified as wives of common soldiers, ages ranging from 18 to approximately 40. Physical condition generally adequate for ritual purposes. 3 require medical attention before purification can begin. 1 is pregnant and will be processed according to Protocol 7, which Senifer has never seen applied, but which the senior scribes discuss in whispers. The procession reaches the first chamber, a circular room, perhaps 30 cubits across. The ceiling is lost in darkness above the reach of the torches. The walls are lined with niches, and in each niche stands a statue of a god or goddess associated with fertility, with conquest, with the divine right of Egypt to claim the bodies of its enemies as surely as it claims their lands. The woman with the Nubian scarification is separated from the others. She is pulled toward a side passage that Senifer knows leads to the chambers reserved for high-value captives, wives of generals, wives of kings, women whose purification carries special significance, whose rituals last not hours but days. She looks back once as they drag her away. Her eyes meet Senifer's across the flickering torchlight. In that moment, he sees that she understands exactly what is about to happen to her. She has heard the stories. Everyone has heard the stories. The difference is that now she is inside one. Senifer looks down at his papyrus. He records that 1 high-value captive has been transferred to the special purification chambers. He does not record her name because he was not given her name, because to the temple records she is not a person with a name. She is Category 3, Subsection B, Officer's Wife, Nubian origin. She is an entry in a ledger. She is a line in a report that will be filed in the temple archives and never shown to anyone outside the priesthood. She is about to spend 7 days in those chambers. Senifer knows what happens during those 7 days. He has read the protocols. He has documented the outcomes. He has seen women enter the special chambers, and he has seen what emerges when the purification is complete. But he has never witnessed the rituals themselves. The rituals are conducted by priests of the third rank and above. Scribes are not permitted inside during active purification. Scribes are permitted only to count the women going in and count the women coming out, and record the official determinations regarding their spiritual status. What happens between entry and exit is documented in texts that Senifer is not authorized to read, texts kept in sealed rooms, texts that describe in clinical priestly language exactly how the wives of Egypt's enemies are transformed from contaminated foreigners into purified vessels suitable for temple service. The remaining 42 women are being sorted now, divided into groups based on age and physical characteristics, and the status of their captured husbands. Some husbands are already dead. Their widows will be processed quickly, assigned to general temple service after 3 days of standard purification. But other husbands are still alive, held in cells beneath the military fortress at Thebes, kept breathing for reasons that Senifer understands but cannot bring himself to articulate directly. Some of the husbands will be brought to Karnak. Some of the husbands will be placed in chambers adjacent to the purification rooms. Some of the husbands will be able to hear what happens to their wives through walls that are deliberately thin. This is not accidental. This is protocol. Senifer's stylus pauses. The high priest is approaching, his white linen robes immaculate despite the dusty passage, his shaved head gleaming with sacred oils. He is Amenhotep, third prophet of Amun, supervisor of purification rituals, keeper of the texts that Senifer is forbidden to read. He is 53 years old and has held his position for 22 years. In that time, he has personally overseen the purification of an estimated 4,000 women. He stops beside Senifer and examines the papyrus with the detached interest of a craftsman reviewing an apprentice's work. The Nubian, he says, the wife of General Pi, transferred to special chambers, third prophet, Senifer confirms. Her husband survived the battle. He's being transported now. He should arrive by the 3rd day of her purification. Amenhotep says this casually, as though discussing the delivery of grain supplies. Senifer nods and makes a notation. He does not ask why a captured general is being brought to a temple rather than executed or ransomed. He does not ask what purpose is served by timing the husband's arrival to coincide with the midpoint of his wife's 7-day ritual. He knows the answer. Everyone who works in these passages knows the answer. He just cannot make himself say it out loud. What you are about to learn has been systematically erased from Egyptian historical records for over 3,000 years. The monuments that tourists photograph, the hieroglyphics that scholars translate, the museums that display mummies and gold artifacts, none of them mention what happened in the underground chambers beneath Egypt's greatest temples. None of them describe the fate of women captured in Egypt's constant wars against Nubia, Libya, Syria, and the Sea Peoples. None of them explain why temple revenues increased dramatically after military victories, or why certain priests accumulated wealth that rivaled the pharaohs themselves. Tonight, I will show you the evidence that survived despite systematic destruction, the texts that were hidden rather than burned, the archaeological discoveries that Egyptologists have struggled to explain through conventional interpretations, the patterns that emerge when you compare Egyptian practices to documented rituals in Mesopotamia, where similar systems operated with less effective erasure. You will learn about the sacred purification rituals that transformed captured wives into temple property, how religious authority was used to justify systematic violation on an industrial scale, how husbands were kept alive specifically to witness their wives' purification as a form of psychological warfare designed to break the will of conquered peoples permanently. You will learn about the children born from these rituals, thousands of them across centuries of Egyptian dominance, and how they were absorbed into the temple system as permanent servants. How an economic infrastructure developed around these practices, with captured women generating revenue through fertility blessings that wealthy Egyptians paid substantial sums to receive. You will learn why this history was erased, who benefited from the erasure, what evidence survived despite the destruction, and why scholars have been reluctant to discuss what the evidence clearly indicates. If you want to understand the real history that empires built monuments to hide, subscribe now and comment below telling me where in the world you are watching from, because these people existed. Their suffering was real, and for 3,000 years their stories have been deliberately silenced. The woman with the Nubian scarification is named Takara. She is 24 years old. She is the wife of General P.A., commander of the Nubian forces defeated at the Battle of Gebel Barkal. In approximately 4 hours, her 7-day purification will begin. Let me tell you what happens during those 7 days. The theology that justified these practices was elaborate, sophisticated, and entirely self-serving. Egyptian religious texts dating back to the Old Kingdom established a fundamental principle. Enemies of Egypt were enemies of the gods. Their bodies were contaminated by foreign spirits. Their souls were aligned with chaos rather than Ma'at, the divine order that Egypt represented. When Egypt conquered foreign peoples, it was not merely expanding territory. It was extending divine order into regions corrupted by chaos. It was performing a sacred duty. This theological framework had profound implications for the treatment of captured populations. Men captured in battle were categorized based on their potential utility. Common soldiers might be enslaved, worked to death in quarries or construction projects, their labor extracting value from their contaminated bodies until those bodies failed. Officers and nobles might be executed publicly to demonstrate divine judgment against chaos, or they might be kept alive for purposes that served Egyptian strategic interests. But women occupied a different category entirely. The texts that survive in fragmentary form, texts that were supposed to be destroyed, that were hidden by scribes who perhaps felt some residual conscience, describe women as vessels. Their bodies were seen as containers that could hold either chaos or order, depending on what filled them. A woman married to a foreign enemy contained the spiritual contamination of that enemy. She was dangerous, polluted, unfit for contact with Egyptian sacred spaces. But she could be purified. The purification rituals that developed across centuries of Egyptian military expansion were designed to transform contaminated foreign women into vessels suitable for sacred purposes. The logic was theological, but the practice was systematic and physical. The texts describe multiple stages of purification, each with specific procedures and durations. The first stage involved physical cleansing, bathing in sacred water, application of natron salts to draw out foreign contamination, shaving of all body hair to remove external attachments to the foreign husband. This stage lasted 1 day and was conducted by female temple servants under priestly supervision. The second stage involved spiritual cleansing, and this is where the texts become both more detailed and more disturbing. Spiritual contamination was believed to reside not just on the body but within it. The foreign husband had implanted his essence inside his wife through their physical union. That essence had to be displaced, replaced with Egyptian sacred essence, overwritten through rituals that the texts describe in clinical priestly language. The priests who conducted these rituals were not acting from personal desire, according to the theological framework. They were serving as vessels themselves, vessels of Amun, of Min, of Osiris, of whichever god the specific ritual invoked. When they engaged with the captive women, they were performing divine service, replacing foreign contamination with sacred Egyptian presence. This was the theology. This was how they justified it to themselves and to the scribes who recorded the procedures. The reality, of course, was that priests selected the most attractive, captive women for extended purification. The reality was that the chambers beneath Karnak were designed for specific purposes that had nothing to do with spiritual transformation. The reality was that women entered those chambers as wives and mothers and individuals, and emerged as broken vessels suitable only for temple service. The reality was that the theology was a mask, but it was an effective mask. It transformed violation into religious duty. It transformed predation into sacred service. It transformed systematic abuse into something that priests could perform without acknowledging what they were actually doing. This is how atrocity becomes normalized, not through simple cruelty, but through elaborate justification, not through acknowledging harm, but through reframing harm as benefit, not through admitting what is happening, but through creating language that describes what is happening without ever naming it directly. The scribes who recorded these procedures used words that meant purification. They used words that meant sacred service. They used words that meant spiritual transformation. They never used words that meant what was actually happening. And for 3,000 years, those words were the only words that survived. Takara is led down a passage narrower than the main corridor, the walls pressing close enough that her shoulders brush stone on both sides. The torchlight is behind her now, the guard with his flickering brand walking at her back, pushing her forward with rough hands whenever she slows. The air is different here, heavier, warmer. The smell that Senifer refused to identify is stronger now, concentrated in this narrow space, impossible to ignore. She is thinking about her husband. General Pie commanded 3,000 Nubian warriors at the Battle of Gebel Barkal. He was 32 years old, experienced in campaigns against both Egyptian expansion and the desert tribes who raided Nubian territories. He had been winning until the third day of fighting, when Egyptian reinforcements arrived from the north and transformed a tactical advantage into catastrophic defeat. Takara watched the battle from the command camp behind the lines. She watched the Nubian formations begin to crumble. She watched the organized retreat become a rout. She watched Egyptian chariots running down fleeing soldiers, watched Egyptian archers picking off the wounded, watched the line of captives growing longer as the afternoon wore on. She saw Pie captured, saw him struck from behind, saw him go down, saw the soldiers bind him while he was still dazed from the blow. She saw him look toward the command camp, toward her, before they dragged him away. She had 3 hours after that. 3 hours before the Egyptian soldiers reached the camp. 3 hours in which she could have run, could have tried to escape into the desert, could have chosen death over capture. She did not run. She stayed because there was nowhere to run to. The desert would kill her as surely as the Egyptians, just more slowly. She stayed because perhaps Pie was still alive. Perhaps there would be negotiations. Perhaps the Egyptians would ransom captured officers, as they sometimes did. She stayed because hope is stubborn, even when evidence says hope is foolish. The Egyptian soldiers found her in Pie's tent, dressed in her finest clothing, seated as though receiving guests rather than awaiting conquest. The officer in command looked at her scarification patterns, at her jewelry, at her bearing, and understood immediately that she was someone important. He did not touch her. His orders were specific. High-value captives were temple property. They were to be delivered intact. The 3-day journey to Karnak was not gentle, but it was not what Takara had feared. She was given water. She was given food. She was allowed to relieve herself with some privacy. The soldiers watched her constantly but kept their distance. She did not understand why, until now. The passage ends at a wooden door reinforced with copper bands. The guard knocks in a specific pattern. The door opens from inside. The chamber beyond is larger than Takara expected, perhaps 20 cubits across, with a ceiling high enough that the lamplight does not reach it. The walls are covered with carved reliefs depicting scenes that make her stomach clench with sudden understanding. The floor is stone, worn smooth by generations of use. There are 3 priests waiting inside. They are shaved bald, their skin oiled, their eyes assessing her with professional detachment. Behind them, against the far wall, is a raised platform covered with white linen. The platform is approximately the length and width of a human body. One of the priests speaks. His voice is calm, his tone almost kind. "You are the wife of General P.A." Takara does not respond. Her voice has stopped working. "Your husband is alive," the priest continues. "He is being transported here. He will arrive in 3 days. On the 4th day of your purification, he will be brought to the adjacent chamber. The walls are thin. He will be able to hear everything that happens here." The priest pauses, allowing this information to register. "The purification will be complete on the 7th day. You will be assigned to temple service. Your husband will be returned to Nubia with full memory of what he heard. He will tell others. They will understand what happens to those who oppose Egypt." Takara finds her voice. It comes out as a whisper. "Kill me instead." The priest's expression does not change. "That is not permitted. Your body belongs to Amun now. Your purification serves divine purposes. What you experience here is not punishment. It is transformation. By the 7th day, you will understand." He gestures to the other priests. They move toward her. Takara's mind begins to retreat from what is about to happen, seeking shelter in some inner space where the next 7 days might be survivable. But she knows that space will not protect her. She knows that the walls are thin. She knows that in 3 days her husband will hear everything. She knows that this is the point. The priests reach for her. The practice of keeping husbands alive to witness their wives' purification was not random cruelty. It was calculated strategy, documented in military texts that survive from the New Kingdom period. The texts are administrative in nature, discussing the pacification of conquered territories with the dispassionate tone of bureaucratic planning. They identify a persistent problem. Conquered peoples often rebelled. They might submit initially when Egyptian armies were present, but once the armies withdrew, resistance would emerge. Leaders would arise. Revolts would require expensive military responses. The solution that evolved over centuries was psychological rather than purely military. Physical defeat was insufficient. The spirit of resistance had to be broken. The texts describe what they call the witnessing protocol. When significant military figures were captured, generals, nobles, tribal chiefs, they were not immediately executed. They were held in conditions that maintained their physical health while systematically destroying their psychological integrity. The most effective method, according to the administrative assessments, was forcing them to witness the purification of their wives. The walls of the adjacent chambers were deliberately constructed to transmit sound. The captured leaders could hear everything that happened during the days-long purification rituals. They could hear their wives' initial resistance. They could hear that resistance fade. They could hear the priests speaking words of religious authority. They could hear sounds they would never be able to forget. And then they were released. Not killed, released, sent back to their homelands with their memories intact. The texts are explicit about the purpose. A dead leader becomes a martyr. A living leader who has heard what happened to his wife, who knows that he was helpless to prevent it, who carries that knowledge back to his people, that leader becomes something else. He becomes a message. He becomes a warning. He becomes living proof of what happens to those who oppose Egypt. The texts record the outcomes with satisfaction. Territories where the witnessing protocol was applied showed significantly lower rates of rebellion. Leaders who returned from Egypt did not lead resistance movements. Many did not lead anything. Many did not speak of what had happened. Many simply faded from public life, broken in ways that their people sensed but did not understand. This was the intended effect. The psychological warfare was designed to destroy not just individual leaders, but the cultures they represented. When a general returned from Egypt, unable to look at his wife, unable to speak of his captivity, unable to resume normal life, his people saw. They understood, on some level, that something terrible had happened. They internalized the lesson. Opposition to Egypt led to consequences worse than death. General Pie is being transported to Karnak on the same road his wife traveled 3 days ago. He does not know yet that she is in the purification chambers. He does not know what awaits him. He knows only that he was defeated, that he is a prisoner, that his wife was taken separately to an unknown destination. He will learn the rest in 3 days, when they place him in the adjacent chamber, and he hears his wife's voice through the deliberately thin walls. He will spend 4 days listening, and then they will send him home. The underground chambers beneath Karnak were not discovered by archaeologists until 1978, and even then, the discovery was largely suppressed. A French archaeological team conducting seismic surveys to map the temple's foundations detected anomalies suggesting extensive subterranean construction. They requested permission to excavate. Permission was denied for 15 years. When excavation was finally allowed in 1993, the team found a network of chambers far more extensive than anyone had anticipated. The passages extended in multiple directions from the main temple complex, some descending as deep as 40 meters below the surface. The construction showed multiple phases, with the oldest chambers dating to the Middle Kingdom, and the most recent additions from the Ptolemaic period, a span of over 1,500 years. The chambers were not empty. The excavation reports, which have never been fully published, describe finding material that required careful handling and discreet storage. Objects that did not fit comfortable narratives about ancient Egyptian civilization, artifacts that raised questions the Egyptian Antiquities Authority preferred not to answer. Among the findings were restraint systems, copper rings, embedded in stone walls at specific heights, with wear patterns indicating prolonged use. Stone platforms with channels carved to direct liquids away from the central surface. Ceramic vessels containing residues that chemical analysis identified as mixtures of sedative compounds derived from lotus and opium poppy. The most significant finds were textual. In a sealed room at the deepest level of the complex, the team discovered a cache of papyri that had been hidden rather than destroyed. The papyri were administrative records, procurement orders, scheduling documents, inventory lists. They documented the operation of what the texts called the purification facility, with the detailed precision of bureaucratic record-keeping. The documents covered a period of approximately 40 years during the reign of Ramesses II. They recorded the intake of 4,847 women designated for purification during that period. They recorded the assignment of 2,093 women to ongoing temple service following purification. They recorded 847 women transferred to secondary facilities in other temple complexes. They recorded 312 women who died during purification procedures and whose bodies were disposed of according to Protocol 12, which was not explained in the recovered documents. The remaining 1,595 women are not accounted for in the surviving records. Their fates are unknown. The documents also recorded births. During the 40-year period covered by the papyri, 1,247 children were born to women undergoing or recovering from purification. These children were designated as temple property from birth. They were assigned numbers rather than names. They were absorbed into the temple workforce as servants, laborers, and for those deemed suitable potential participants in future purification rituals. The children born from these unions had no legal identity outside the temple system. They could not own property. They could not marry without temple permission. They could not leave temple grounds without supervision. They were, in legal terms, living offerings to the gods, products of sacred union between contaminated foreign vessels and divine Egyptian essence. They were slaves, in other words. But slaves wrapped in religious language that made their slavery sound like blessing. The excavation team documented everything. They photographed the chambers. They cataloged the artifacts. They transcribed the papyri. And then the project was shut down. The official reason was funding. The excavation had exceeded its budget. The Egyptian government could not allocate additional resources. The site would be preserved for future study when circumstances permitted. The team was dispersed. The artifacts were placed in storage. The papyri were transferred to a secure facility where access was restricted to authorized researchers. Very few researchers have ever been authorized. What happened at Karnak was not unique. Similar facilities existed at temple complexes throughout Egypt. The texts recovered at Karnak reference shipments of purified women to Luxor, to Memphis, to Heliopolis, to Abydos. The system was national in scale. The economic infrastructure supporting it was substantial. But Karnak was the center. Karnak was where the highest value captives were processed. Karnak was where the protocols were developed and refined over centuries of practice. And Karnak is where the evidence survived, because someone, 3,000 years ago, chose to hide documents rather than burn them. Senifer cannot sleep. He lies on his reed mat in the scribe's dormitory, listening to the breathing of the other scribes around him, staring at the ceiling that is barely visible in the faint moonlight filtering through the small window. Below him, beneath the stone floors and the layers of construction that separate the public temple from its hidden depths, 43 women are spending their first night in the purification chambers. 42 of them are in the general facility, undergoing the standard 3-day procedure. One of them, the woman with the Nubian scarification, is in the special chambers, at the beginning of something that will last 7 days. Senifer has read the protocols. He has seen the scheduling documents. He knows what is happening right now, as he lies awake, as the other scribes sleep, as the temple above remains peaceful in the Egyptian night. He knows that he should not think about it. The senior scribes have told him this explicitly. The mind adapts, they said. The first weeks are difficult. The first months are difficult. Eventually, the work becomes routine. Eventually, you stop seeing the women as individuals. Eventually, you see only categories and numbers and administrative procedures. Senifer is 11 months into his assignment. He is still seeing individuals. He sees Takara's face in the torchlight, the moment their eyes met, the moment of recognition when she understood what was about to happen to her. He sees the 42 other faces that he deliberately avoided looking at, because looking made everything harder. He sees the face of the woman who was pregnant, the one designated for Protocol 7, and he realizes that he still does not know what Protocol 7 involves. He does not want to know, but he will find out. He will find out because the records will come across his desk, because the documentation will require his stylus, because the temple bureaucracy will demand precise accounting of every woman processed through the facility. Senifer is 23 years old. He wanted to be a scribe because scribes were respected, because scribes had comfortable lives, because his father was a craftsman who worked with his hands until those hands were ruined, and who told his son to find work that preserved the body while exercising the mind. His father did not know what scribes at Karnak actually documented. No one outside the temple knows. The priests maintain absolute secrecy about the purification rituals. The women who survive and enter temple service are forbidden to speak of their experiences under penalty of death. The men who witness their wives' purification are psychologically destroyed and return home unable to articulate what happened. The children born from these unions know nothing else, have no one to tell them that their existence represents something monstrous. The system is closed, the silence is enforced. The world above remains ignorant. And Senifer lies awake, thinking about a woman named Takara who is spending her first night in the special chambers, whose husband will arrive in 3 days, whose voice will carry through deliberately thin walls for 4 days after that. He is thinking about Protocol 7. He is thinking about the 312 women who died during purification procedures in the 40-year period, covered by the old administrative records. He is thinking about what those women experienced before they died. He does not sleep until dawn begins to lighten the window. The economic dimensions of the purification system are documented in temple financial records that survived because accountants are thorough and because archives are occasionally overlooked during campaigns of destruction. The Temple of Amun at Karnak was one of the wealthiest institutions in the ancient world. Its landholdings exceeded those of most Egyptian nobles. Its grain stores could feed tens of thousands. Its gold reserves rivaled the royal treasury. A significant portion of this wealth derived from the purification system. The primary revenue stream was what the records call fertility blessings. Wealthy Egyptians who wanted children, whose wives had failed to conceive, whose family lines required heirs, could petition the temple for sacred assistance. The petition required substantial payment, the records show, amounts equivalent to several years' income for prosperous merchants. If the petition was approved, the petitioner's wife would spend time at the temple receiving fertility blessings. These blessings involved contact with women who had been purified, whose bodies now contained sacred Egyptian essence rather than foreign contamination. The theological explanation was that the purified women served as intermediaries, channels through which divine fertility power could flow to Egyptian women seeking children. The physical mechanics of how this channeling occurred are not described explicitly in the surviving records, but the outcome statistics are clear. Women who received fertility blessings at Karnak had significantly higher conception rates than those who did not. The temple's reputation for effective intervention spread throughout Egypt. The waiting list for appointments grew so long that the temple established a tiered pricing system, with wealthy petitioners paying premium rates for expedited service. The purified women were the key resource in this system. Their bodies were the commodity. The temple's investment in acquiring and processing them generated returns that funded temple expansion, priest salaries, religious festivals, and political influence. The secondary revenue stream was ongoing temple service. Women who completed purification did not return to their previous lives. They became temple property, assigned to various functions based on their age, appearance, and physical condition. Some served in public-facing roles as temple attendants and ceremonial participants. Some served in private capacities within the priest residential quarters. Some were assigned to the fertility blessing program. All of them generated value for the temple. All of them were assets on the temple's balance sheet. All of them were the product of military victories that captured the wives of Egypt's enemies. This created an economic incentive for military expansion that complemented the political and territorial incentives. Each war brought new captives. New captives meant new purification revenue. New purified women meant enhanced fertility blessing capacity. Enhanced capacity meant increased petitioner payments. The system fed itself. War generated women. Women generated wealth. Wealth funded the army. The army generated more war. The records from the 40-year period at Karnak show revenue from fertility blessings, averaging approximately 200 gold deben annually. This was enough to fund the construction of the hypostyle hall's northern expansion. The tourists who admire those columns today are admiring construction financed by the systematic violation of captured women. This connection is not mentioned on any informational placard at the site. Takara's first night passes in ways that she will not later be able to describe coherently. The mind, when confronted with experiences that exceed its capacity to process, employs defense mechanisms. Dissociation is primary among these. The consciousness separates from the body, observes events from a distance, refuses to integrate what is happening into the continuous narrative of self. Takara spends portions of the first night outside herself, watching from somewhere near the ceiling as the priests perform the initial purification procedures. She sees her own body on the white-draped platform. She sees the movements, the positions, the systematic progression through what the priests clearly regard as routine protocol. She does not feel what is happening because feeling would destroy her. She has retreated to a place where feeling cannot reach. The priests are not concerned by her dissociation. They have seen it before. They know that women respond this way initially. They know that the dissociation will fade as the days progress, that consciousness will be forced back into the body, that full awareness will return precisely when the rituals are designed to require it. Day 2 is more difficult than Day 1. The procedures intensify. The intervals between procedures shorten. Rest periods are calculated to prevent complete physical collapse, while ensuring that recovery is never complete, that exhaustion becomes a constant state, that resistance requires energy the body no longer possesses. Takara's dissociation begins to fail. She finds herself inside her body again, feeling what is being done, unable to escape back to that distant place near the ceiling. She screams, but screaming is expected. Screaming does not slow the procedures. Screaming is simply documented. Senifer, in his scribe station above, notes the times and durations without recording what the screams suggest. By the end of Day 2, Takara has stopped screaming. She has discovered that screaming consumes energy she cannot afford to spend. She has learned to conserve herself, to retreat into stillness, to make her body as passive as possible in hopes of reducing the intensity of what is being done to it. The priests note this adaptation. It is expected, it is documented, it is a sign that purification is progressing according to schedule. Day 3 is when her husband arrives. General Pie is brought to Karnak in chains, escorted by a detachment of soldiers who treat him with the careful handling reserved for valuable cargo. He is not beaten. He is not starved. He is not subjected to the casual brutality that common prisoners experience. He is being preserved. The journey from the holding facility at Thebes takes 8 hours. Pie walks the entire distance, his chains long enough to permit normal stride but short enough to prevent running. The soldiers do not speak to him. They do not explain where he is being taken or why. He knows his wife was captured. He has been told that much. He has spent the days since the battle wondering about her fate, imagining possibilities, trying to convince himself that she might have been ransomed, that her obvious nobility might have afforded her some protection. When the Temple of Karnak comes into view, he understands that his hopes were misplaced. Every warrior in Nubia knows about Karnak. Every family that has lost members to Egyptian campaigns has heard the stories. The stories are incomplete, deliberately vague, because the survivors do not speak clearly about what happened to them or their wives. But the stories are enough. Karnak means the purification chambers. Karnak means the wives of Egypt's enemies transformed into something else. Pie stops walking. The soldiers do not beat him for stopping. They simply wait, allowing him to absorb what he is seeing, allowing the understanding to settle into his mind. Then one of them speaks. Your wife is inside. She has been there for 3 days. You will be placed in the chamber next to hers. The walls are thin. You will be able to hear everything. In 4 days, when her purification is complete, you will be released. Pie does not respond. His capacity for response has temporarily failed. The soldier continues. You will return to Nubia. You will tell others what you heard. They will understand what Egypt does to those who oppose us. They lead him forward. He walks because stopping will not change anything, because his legs continue functioning even when his mind has stopped, because there is no option except to walk toward what is waiting. The underground passage descends. The air grows thick. The smell reaches him, and he recognizes it immediately, instinctively, with a visceral understanding that bypasses conscious thought. He knows what that smell means. They place him in a small chamber, perhaps 10 cubits square. The walls are stone. The floor is stone. There is a sleeping mat in one corner and a ceramic pot for waste in another. A small opening near the ceiling admits air and faint light from the passage outside. The wall opposite the entrance is different from the others. It is thinner. Through it, P.A. can hear sounds from the adjacent chamber. He can hear his wife. She is speaking. Her voice is hoarse, exhausted, but recognizable. She is saying words in Nubian, their native language, words that the priests apparently do not understand or do not care about. She is saying his name. She is saying, P.A., I know you can hear me. I know they brought you here. I know what they want you to experience. I want you to know that I am still here. I am still me. They have not destroyed me yet. P.A. presses his palms against the thin wall. He cannot respond. The wall transmits sound in only one direction, designed to let him hear without being heard. But he presses his palms against the stone, as though she might feel the pressure, as though his presence might somehow reach her. She keeps speaking. They will try to break you through me. They will make you listen. They want you to return to Nubia destroyed. They want you to be their message. Her voice grows quieter, as though she is tiring, as though the effort of speaking is consuming reserves she cannot spare. Do not let them. Whatever you hear, whatever happens, do not let them destroy you. Remember who we are. Remember what we fought for. Remember that they can hurt us, but they cannot make us forget. There is a sound, a door opening, voices in Egyptian, footsteps approaching. They are coming back. Takara says, The 4th day is beginning. You will hear what happens. I cannot stop it. I can only tell you that I will survive it. I will still be me on the other side. The footsteps reach her. Egyptian voices speak ritual phrases. Takara stops speaking in Nubian. The sounds begin. P.A. listens because he cannot stop listening. The wall transmits everything, every sound, every voice, every indication of what is happening to his wife in the adjacent chamber. He listens for 4 days. On the 7th day, they come for him. The children born from purification rituals occupied a unique position in Egyptian temple society. They were not slaves in the conventional sense. They received religious education, wore temple clothing, ate temple food, and participated in temple ceremonies, but they were not free. They could not leave temple grounds without permission. They could not marry without temple authorization. They could not own property or accumulate wealth or make decisions about their own futures. They were offerings, products of sacred union, living evidence that the purification system worked. The temple records documented these children meticulously, tracking their development from birth through assignment to permanent roles. The records show patterns that reveal the systematic nature of the system. Children who showed intellectual aptitude were trained as scribes, eventually joining the administrative apparatus that documented the very system that had produced them. Children with physical strength were assigned to labor crews that maintained temple infrastructure. Children deemed attractive by temple standards were reserved for what the records call continued sacred service, meaning they would participate in purification rituals when they reached appropriate age. The cycle was self-perpetuating. Children born from violation became participants in violation. The system produced its own workforce, its own replacement parts, its own continuity. One such child was documented in the records as Temple number 847-12. The number indicated he was the 12th child registered in the 847th intake period. He had no name in the official records because children of purification were not given names until they were assigned permanent roles. Temple Number 84712 was born to a Syrian woman captured during Ramesses II's campaigns in the Levant. His father was unknown. The records did not track which priest had performed which purification ritual, because theologically, all the priests were vessels of the same divine essence. The question of biological paternity was irrelevant. The child belonged to Amun. He was raised in the temple's children's compound, a section of the complex where offspring of purified women lived communally under the supervision of older temple servants, who were themselves products of the same system. He learned to read and write at age 6. He showed aptitude for mathematics. He was assigned to scribe training at age 10. By age 19, he was working in the administrative section that documented purification procedures. The records do not indicate whether Temple number 84712 understood the significance of what he was documenting. They do not indicate whether he knew that his own mother had been processed through the same system he now administered. They do not indicate whether he ever thought about the women whose intake numbers he recorded, the children whose registration he processed, the cycle that had produced him and that he now helped perpetuate. The records indicate only that he was efficient, that his work was accurate, that his supervisors found him satisfactory. He was given a name when he reached age 25 and was promoted to senior scribe status. The name was Meriamun, meaning beloved of Amun. The name was assigned by the high priest. The name reflected the temple's ownership of his identity. The name erased whatever his mother might have called him during the brief period before he was taken to the children's compound. Meriamun worked at Karnak for the rest of his life. He documented thousands of women entering the purification chambers. He registered hundreds of children born from those purifications. He maintained the records that accounted for the system's operation with the precision that bureaucracy demands. He died at age 53. His body was mummified using simplified procedures reserved for temple servants. He was buried in a mass tomb with other temple workers. The records note that he was replaced by Temple number 912. 7. Another child of the purification system, another product of the cycle, another generation perpetuating what had created it. The comparison with Mesopotamian practices is instructive because Mesopotamian records survived more completely. The temples of Ishtar in Babylon operated systems remarkably similar to what the Egyptian evidence indicates. Captured women were dedicated to the goddess, assigned to temple service, subjected to what the records call sacred duties that modern scholars have learned to interpret. The Babylonian records are more explicit because Babylonian culture was less invested in the kind of systematic erasure that characterized Egypt. The Babylonians documented their practices openly, viewing them as normal religious activity rather than something that required concealment. The Code of Hammurabi, dating to approximately 1750 BCE, contains provisions regarding temple women that illuminate the legal framework surrounding these practices. Women dedicated to temples had specific legal status. Their children had specific inheritance rights or lack thereof. Their bodies were regulated by temple authority in ways that the code specifies with legal precision. The Babylonian evidence allows scholars to fill gaps in the Egyptian record. Where Egyptian sources use euphemism and implication, Babylonian sources use direct description. Where Egyptian records were destroyed, Babylonian clay tablets survived because clay is more durable than papyrus, and because conquering powers had less investment in erasing Babylonian history than Egyptian priests had in erasing their own. The parallels are striking. Both systems frame the treatment of captured women as religious service rather than violation. Both systems generated substantial temple revenue through the women's ongoing service. Both systems produced children who were absorbed into the temple workforce. Both systems used the threat of this treatment as psychological warfare against enemy populations. The primary difference was in the aftermath. Babylon fell to the Persians, then to the Greeks, then to various powers who had no investment in maintaining Babylonian religious institutions. The temple systems collapsed. The records became historical curiosities rather than secrets requiring protection. Egypt, by contrast, maintained continuity. The pharaonic system evolved into the Ptolemaic system, which evolved into Roman provincial administration, which evolved into Christian institutional control. At each transition, there were parties with interest in suppressing evidence of what the temples had done. The Christians who took control of Egyptian religious sites in the 4th and 5th centuries CE were particularly thorough. They demolished temples, defaced hieroglyphics, burned texts, and physically erased evidence of practices they found abhorrent. But their destruction was selective. They targeted what they could find, what was visible, what was accessible. The underground chambers at Karnak were sealed, their entrances hidden, their contents preserved by their very inaccessibility. The documents that the 1,993 excavation discovered had survived because no one knew they existed. This is why the comparison with Mesopotamia matters. The Babylonian evidence confirms that the practices indicated by the Egyptian fragments were real, were widespread, were standard operating procedure for ancient Near Eastern temple systems. The Egyptian erasure was not evidence that such practices did not occur. It was evidence that someone worked very hard to pretend they did not occur. On the 7th day, Takara is removed from the special chambers. She cannot walk unassisted. 2 temple servants support her, half carrying her through passages that she barely recognizes. Her awareness has become intermittent, fading in and out, struggling to maintain connection to a body that no longer feels like hers. She is brought to a room she has not seen before. It is smaller than the purification chamber, furnished with a sleeping mat and a low table holding bread and beer. The servants lower her onto the mat and withdraw without speaking. She lies there for what might be hours. Time has stopped meaning anything. The distinction between sleeping and waking has blurred into a continuous state of exhaustion that permits neither real rest nor full consciousness. Eventually, a priest enters. Not one of the 3 who conducted her purification, an older man, his manner less clinical, his voice almost gentle. "The purification is complete," he says. "You are now a vessel of sacred Egyptian essence. The foreign contamination has been displaced. You are suitable for temple service." Takara does not respond. She is not certain she could respond if she wanted to. Her voice has been damaged by 7 days of sounds that were not quite screaming. "Your husband was released this morning," the priest continues. "He is being escorted to the border. He will return to Nubia with full memory of what he heard. He will serve Egypt's purposes by demonstrating what happens to those who oppose us." Still, Takara does not respond. "You will not see him again. You will not return to Nubia. You belong to the temple now. Your previous life is ended. Your previous identity is ended. You will be given a new name, an Egyptian name, and you will answer to that name for the rest of your service." The priest pauses, perhaps expecting some reaction. When none comes, he continues. "Many women in your position find the transition difficult. This is expected. You will be allowed time to recover physically before assignment to duties. The temple provides for its servants. You will have food, clothing, shelter. You will have purpose." He waits again. Takara's eyes are open, but she is not looking at him. She is looking at something far away, something that exists only in her memory, something that the priests cannot see or touch or purify. She is looking at Nubia. She is looking at her home. She is looking at the life that ended 7 days ago when the Egyptian soldiers reached the command camp. "Your new name is Meryetemun," the priest says. "You will respond to this name. You will forget your previous name. Do you understand?" Takara Meryetemun does not respond. She will not speak for 4 months. When she finally does speak, Her first word will be a name PA spoken to no one, in an empty room, in the middle of the night. No one will hear it. General PA crosses the border into Nubia 17 days after the Battle of Gebel Barkal. He is not restrained. He is not escorted. The Egyptian soldiers simply stop at the border marker, gesture toward the southern horizon, and wait for him to walk away. They have no further use for him. He has served his purpose. He walks for 3 days before reaching a settlement where he is recognized. Word spreads quickly. The general who was captured, the general who was taken to Karnak, the general who has returned. The people who gather to see him do not ask what happened. They can see it in his face. They can see it in the way he moves, the way he looks at nothing, the way he flinches when anyone speaks too loudly or comes too close. They have seen this before. They have seen other men return from Egyptian captivity with the same emptiness in their eyes. They know what it means even if they do not know the specific details. PA goes to his home. It is empty. His wife is not there because his wife is never coming back. He sits in the room where they slept together, where they planned their future together, where they believed they would grow old together. He sits there for a long time. When his officers come to discuss the military situation, to plan resistance, to talk about rebuilding the forces that were destroyed at Gebel Barkal, PA listens without speaking. When they ask him to lead again, to take command, to strike back against Egypt, he looks at them with eyes that no longer contain the general they remember. He never commands troops again. He never speaks of what he heard through the thin walls at Karnak. He never speaks of his wife at all. He lives for another 18 years, a silent presence in his community, a warning that everyone understands without being able to articulate. When young men speak of fighting Egypt, their elders point to PA. Look at what Egypt does. Look at what happens. Look at what comes back. The message serves its purpose. The next generation does not rebel. Senifer works in the temple administration for another 41 years. He rises through the ranks from junior scribe to senior scribe, to chief of documentation, responsible for training new scribes in the procedures they will follow, the categories they will use, the records they will maintain. He teaches them what he was taught, how to count women as they enter, how to categorize them by status and origin, how to document purification outcomes without describing the procedures, how to maintain the silence that the temple requires. He does not teach them about the faces. He does not tell them that the faces accumulate, that after 4 decades there are thousands of faces stored in his memory, faces glimpsed briefly in torchlight before being led to chambers he was never permitted to enter, that some nights he dreams of those faces, dreams of them speaking words he cannot understand, dreams of them asking questions he cannot answer. He does not tell them about the screams. The screams carry through the stone in certain conditions, when the weather is right, when the wind moves through the passages in particular ways. Senior scribes learn to recognize the conditions, learn to position themselves away from the passages that transmit sound most effectively, learn to focus on their papyrus with concentration that excludes everything else. Senifer has spent 41 years learning not to hear. He is not successful. The hearing happens whether he wants it or not. The sounds enter his ears and lodge in his memory, and emerge in moments when his concentration fails. He hears them when he is falling asleep. He hears them when he is waking up. He hears them when he looks at the women being led to the chambers and realizes that their faces will soon be making those sounds. He tells himself that the system is ancient, that he did not create it, that refusing to participate would only destroy his own life without saving anyone else. He tells himself that the women would be processed whether he documented them or not, that his stylus changes nothing, that his presence is administrative rather than causal. He tells himself these things because the alternative is acknowledging what he has spent 41 years helping to operate. On the day he retires, turning over his responsibilities to a younger scribe who has the same expression Senifer remembers having 41 years ago, Senifer walks through the temple complex one final time. He walks past the columns that tourists will admire 3,000 years later. He walks past the inscriptions that describe Egyptian greatness and divine favor. He walks past the entrance to the underground passages that he has used more times than he can count. He stops there. He looks at the passage entrance for a long time. Then he goes home and begins to write. The documents that were found in the sealed room at the deepest level of the Karnak complex were not official records. They were personal accounts, written in a hand that paleographic analysis dates to the late reign of Ramesses II. They describe the purification system from the perspective of someone who witnessed it for decades, who documented it daily, who carried the weight of that documentation until it became unbearable. They describe faces, they describe sounds, they describe the systematic process by which women were transformed from individuals into categories. They describe, in terms that leave no room for comfortable interpretation, what happened in the purification chambers. Senifer hid these documents because he could not destroy them, because he had spent 41 years participating in destruction and could not bring himself to destroy the evidence of what he had helped to do, because he believed that someone, someday, should know the truth. He hid them in a room that he sealed himself, using skills he had learned as a young scribe when construction projects required documentation of spaces being closed off. He hid them where no one would look, where the official archives would not contain them, where they might survive the destruction that he knew would eventually be attempted. He was right about the destruction. He was right about the survival. He was wrong about the someone who would find them. He expected an Egyptian, someone who would understand the language and the context and the weight of what he had documented. Instead, the someone was a French archaeologist, 3,000 years later, who required months of consultation with specialists before understanding what the papyri described. By then, Senifer had been dead for millennia. His body, unlike the temple servants' bodies, had not been preserved. He was cremated according to his own instructions, his ashes scattered in the Nile, his physical form dissolved into water that carried pieces of him to the sea. He left nothing behind except the documents. The documents are enough. The systematic erasure of this history from Egyptian records was not accidental. The pharaohs who succeeded Ramesses II faced pressure from multiple directions to suppress evidence of the purification system. Foreign powers demanded the release of captives. Domestic religious reformers questioned practices that seemed to contradict principles of Ma'at. Economic changes reduced the profitability of temple service systems. But the primary driver of erasure was the rise of ethical frameworks that could not accommodate what the temples had done. Beginning in the later New Kingdom and accelerating through the late period, Egyptian religious thought increasingly emphasized personal morality, individual judgment, and accountability for actions during life. The concept of the weighing of the heart, the judgment of the soul against the feather of Ma'at, became central to Egyptian understanding of the afterlife. This created a problem. If souls were judged based on their actions, if hearts were weighed against justice, then what happened to priests who had performed purification rituals? What happened to scribes who had documented them? What happened to pharaohs who had ordered them? The theological solution was erasure. What had not happened could not be judged. What was not recorded could not be weighed. What had been destroyed could not condemn. The destruction of evidence began in the 21st dynasty and continued systematically through subsequent periods. Temple archives were purged. Offensive inscriptions were chiseled away. Underground chambers were sealed and their entrances hidden. By the time Greek scholars began studying Egyptian civilization, the purification system had been largely erased from accessible records. The Greeks knew that Egyptian temples had extensive personnel, that captured peoples were sometimes dedicated to temple service that religious rituals included elements they found disturbing. But they did not know the full extent of what had occurred because the Egyptians had hidden it successfully. The Romans knew even less. The Christians who followed knew nothing at all, except that Egyptian temples had been sites of pagan abomination that deserved destruction. The destruction was thorough, but not complete. Documents hidden by scribes like Senifer survived because no one knew to look for them. Underground chambers survived because sealing them created preservation conditions that open-air structures could not match. Archaeological evidence survived because stone wears slowly, and because patterns of wear contain information that deliberate erasure cannot fully eliminate. The truth survives in fragments, in documents that were supposed to be destroyed, in chambers that were supposed to remain hidden forever, in comparative evidence from other cultures that practiced similar systems without such effective erasure. The truth survives because truth is difficult to kill completely. Amun, the woman who was once Takara, serves in the Temple of Amun for 23 years. She is assigned to the fertility blessing program after her initial recovery period. Her role is to serve as an intermediary, to help Egyptian women seeking children receive the sacred influence that is believed to grant fertility. The physical mechanics of how this intermediation works are documented in records that remain sealed. She is efficient in her duties. She does not resist. She does not complain. She does not speak of her previous life, except for that one word PA spoken in empty rooms when no one is listening. She ages more quickly than Egyptian women of similar years. Her hair goes gray at 30. Her joints develop chronic pain at 35. Her vision deteriorates at 40. By 45, she is moved from fertility blessing service to general temple attendance, her role reduced to cleaning and carrying, and the physical labor that does not require the appearance of health. She dies at 47. The cause, according to the temple medical records, is failure to thrive, the same diagnosis applied to women who simply stop fighting to remain alive, whose bodies give up without specific disease or injury, whose deaths cannot be attributed to anything except accumulated damage that eventually becomes fatal. She is buried in the temple cemetery reserved for servants. Her grave is unmarked. Her name, her Egyptian name, the one the priests gave her, is recorded in the death register, alongside a number indicating her service category and duration. Her Nubian name dies with her, unrecorded, unremembered, except that Senifer wrote it down. In his personal documents, in the pages he hid for someone to find 3,000 years later, he recorded the name she spoke on that first night in the chambers. The name he heard through the thin walls when she spoke to her husband. The name that the official records erased. Takara. He did not know what the name meant. He did not speak Nubian. He wrote it phonetically, approximating the sounds in hieratic script that was designed for Egyptian words. But he wrote it. He preserved it. He made sure that someone, someday, would know that she had a name before the priests took it from her. This is why he wrote the documents. This is why he hid them. This is why he could not bring himself to participate in the destruction of evidence that he knew would be attempted. Because the women had names. Because the faces he remembered had belonged to individuals with histories and families and identities that the temple system erased. Because the categories and numbers and administrative procedures concealed something that should not be concealed. He could not stop the system. He could not save the women. He could not change anything about how the temple operated. But he could write down the names. He could preserve the truth. He could ensure that 3,000 years of erasure would not be entirely successful. What does this history mean? It means that ancient civilizations were not the noble ancestors that nationalist mythologies prefer to remember. It means that great monuments were built by societies capable of systematic atrocity. It means that religious authority can be used to justify anything, to transform violation into sacred service, to make cruelty seem holy. It means that erasure is deliberate. When we cannot find evidence of ancient crimes, we should not assume those crimes did not occur. We should assume that someone worked very hard to hide them. The absence of evidence is sometimes evidence of destruction rather than evidence of absence. It means that the victims existed. They had names, even when those names were taken from them. They had lives, even when those lives were ended or transformed beyond recognition. They were real people who experienced real suffering, and the comfortable narratives we prefer do not change what they endured. It means that the patterns persist. The theology was Egyptian, but the logic was universal. Use religious or political authority to justify systematic violation. Target the women of defeated enemies. Use their treatment as psychological warfare against resistance. Generate economic benefit from their ongoing exploitation. Produce children who become part of the system that produced them. These patterns appear throughout history. They appear in documented systems from Mesopotamia to Rome to medieval Europe to colonial empires to modern conflicts. The specific justifications change. The underlying mechanics remain. Recognizing the patterns is how we identify them when they appear in our own time. Understanding what happened at Karnak is how we understand what continues to happen in places where similar systems operate with less historical distance. This is why the truth matters. Not as sensationalism, not as shock value, not as entertainment, as recognition, as acknowledgement, as refusal to let the erasure succeed. The women who passed through the purification chambers at Karnak were real. Their suffering was real. Their stories were deliberately hidden by people who understood that what had been done to them was indefensible. Now you know. Takara. Her name meant treasure in Nubian. She was the daughter of a merchant who traded goods along the Nile. She married Pa when she was 18, a strategic union between a military family and a commercial family that benefited both. She loved her husband. He loved her. They expected to spend their lives together, to have children, to grow old watching grandchildren play in gardens they would plant together. The Battle of Gebel Barkal ended that expectation. She was 24 when she entered the purification chambers at Karnak. She was 47 when she died. Those 23 years were spent in service to a temple that had systematically violated her and then used her body to generate revenue until that body failed. She never saw her husband again. She never learned what happened to him after his release. Never knew that he lived another 18 years in silence. Never knew that his refusal to speak of what he heard was its own form of resistance, a refusal to serve Egypt's psychological warfare purposes by spreading the terror they wanted him to spread. She never had children. The temple records indicate that she was included in Protocol 8 procedures, which, the surviving documents suggest, involved methods to prevent conception in women assigned to fertility blessing service. The system did not want its intermediaries becoming pregnant. Pregnancy would remove them from service. Prevention was more efficient than dealing with consequences. She never returned to Nubia. The distance was not far, perhaps 2 weeks' travel, but the temple did not permit servants to leave, and she had no resources, no contacts, no way to survive the journey, even if she could escape. She died as Marietamun. She was buried as Marietamun. The temple records remember her as Marietamun, but Senifer remembered her as Takara. And now you remember her as Takara, too. The documents that Senifer hid remain in restricted storage. The full excavation reports from the 1993 Karnak project have never been published. The artifacts remain in secure facilities where access requires authorization that few researchers receive. The papyri have been studied by a small number of specialists who have published carefully worded papers that discuss the document's significance without reproducing their contents in full. The reluctance is understandable. The documents describe practices that challenge comfortable assumptions about Egyptian civilization. They raise questions about how we present ancient history to the public, about what we include in museums and textbooks, about whose stories we tell and whose stories we suppress. But suppression serves the original erasure. Every year that passes without full publication, without honest acknowledgement, without integration of this evidence into mainstream understanding of Egyptian history, is another year that the priest's destruction succeeds. The women deserved better than erasure. They deserve acknowledgement. They deserve to have their stories told, even when those stories are difficult, even when they challenge narratives we prefer. This video is part of that acknowledgement. This story is part of that telling. Takara existed. Senifer existed. The system that processed thousands of women existed. The evidence survives, despite systematic destruction. What you do with this knowledge is your choice, but you have it now. The erasure has failed, at least partially, at least for the people who watch this video and understand what it describes. Subscribe if you want more hidden histories exposed. Comment below telling me where in the world you are watching from. Share this video with anyone who believes that ancient civilizations were noble and enlightened, that religious authority was always benevolent, that the great monuments we admire were built by societies fundamentally different from the brutal systems that exist today. They were not different. They were the same. The patterns persist. The only thing that changes is our willingness to see them. The Temple of Amun at Karnak is a tourist destination today. Millions of visitors walk through the hypostyle hall, admiring the columns, photographing the hieroglyphics, marveling at the engineering and artistry of ancient Egypt. Beneath their feet, sealed chambers contain the evidence of what funded that construction. The platforms where women were processed, the walls that transmitted sound to adjacent cells, the passages that led down into darkness where priests performed rituals that the official records never described. The tourists do not know. The informational placards do not mention it. The tour guides do not discuss it. But the chambers are there. The evidence is there. The truth is there, waiting for someone to acknowledge it openly, waiting for the erasure to finally end. Let this video be part of that ending.